Direct from Foxborough, Massachusetts, the gem of Norfolk County, and taped at the studios of Foxborough Cable Access. It's Foxborough Central, and here's your host, Bob Hickey.
Welcome to another great episode of Foxborough Central. As you heard from the announcement, I am Bob Hickey, your host. Thank you for taking a few minutes to sit with me and my guests as we learn about the things, people, places, and events that make Foxborough the gem of Norfolk County. I am here today with my new friend, Joe Relanitis. How are you doing, sir?
Good morning, Bob.
Good morning. It's great to have you here with us. Joe is a regional representative for the Food and Drug Administration. Am I correct? All right. Is that your official title?
Public Affairs Officer, New England District FDA.
Okay.
It's a 6-state New England area, so it's regional.
Okay, so it's regional. Now, do you cover all of Massachusetts, eastern Massachusetts? I know you're based out of Worcester.
I am. We just moved to Boylston not too long ago, but we still call ourselves a Worcester resident post because it's a population center. Yeah, I hit all.
Not a lot of people know where Boylston is.
They don't, unfortunately, but it's a hidden jewel, you might say, in the countryside outside of the city. I'm in all 6 of the New England states. I can't say that I get to them all the time. That's why we come on great shows like this, because it magnifies our message and gives us the opportunity to get that out to people, really.
Well, we appreciate you coming down to Foxborough to spend a little time with us. We've, there's so many questions, so many things to talk about. And when it comes to the Food and Drug Administration, many people perhaps have the notion or the misconception that it's just another big government bureaucracy. It's faceless, it's touchless, it's tasteless, and yet you occasionally read in the newspaper about some big issue. And I guess, me being a bit of a history buff, I'm always fascinated about how we get to where we are. I can tell you about how the studio came to be. I can tell you about how I came to be sitting here, although that's a very boring and short story, so we won't go into that. But Joe, can you tell us, really, what is the history? How did the FDA become a part of our lives?
Sure, that's a great facet, Bob. I'm glad you asked. Well, regulatory government, protecting the consumer is a major concern for the federal government. And like all agencies, we've evolved over the past 150 years to be who we are now. Presently, about 13,000 plus people work for the Food and Drug Administration, Federal Food and Drug Administration. States have their own regulatory agencies as well.
So it's unaffiliated then. So the federal drug, and then Massachusetts
has its own Department of Health and its own Food and Drug as well. They take a lot of guidance, and we work with them. We share information and inspections and a lot of training. We're sort of the federal, sort of the top of the pyramid as far as consumer safety goes. When it comes to FDA, we're the top of the pyramid. Just the way it works out, really.
And then of course, I'm going to digress, and we're going to hopefully come back to where you're at. Does the FDA have regulatory oversight of the state and local health boards and Department of Health?
Not really. We have a lot of input. They copy a lot of they adhere to our regulations, because federal regulations have priority basis.
They would trump a local statute
in many cases. But there are state regulations that have other jurisdictions that go in a different direction than ours. So they intermingle. They're parts of a regulatory puzzle, consumer protection puzzle, and they really are pretty self-supportive and sort of work well together. Training is a lot of what we do with the state, and exchanging information for that is a major goal of what we do, really.
Okay.
So, if you go back a long ways in history, you'll find that Massachusetts, way back when, created, smaller scale regulatory agencies, 120, 130, 180 years ago. But it wasn't really, Bob, until the 1860s, under the Lincoln administration, that the FDA really got its foundation. If you look at what was happening back in 1861, 1862, we had a civil war going on. And we had a Union Army who was dealing with a rebellious Confederacy in the South. And for Mr. Lincoln, failure was not an option.
Right.
He just didn't want to lose this war and have two nations, in the same geographic area that we have one now. So an army travels on its stomach, and we had a huge army at the time. So Mr. Lincoln created the Bureau of Chemistry. The reason for that was oversight and regulation of medicine, which an injured Yankee soldier really needed badly.
Sure.
Good medicine that worked, not that killed him after the Battle of Shiloh, that wanted to cure him.
Well, and war, of course, always brings on an opportunity for technological gains, and in the war between the states, of course, it was, it's well known that it was a huge step forward as far as how to treat injured, and maybe because of the scale and just the opportunity presented itself, it was unfortunate, but that hadn't presented anesthesia.
Sure. The amputations that we had to confront, the proper medicine to treat post-amputees so they wouldn't have gangrenous infections pop up. You're exactly right. There was a need for safe medicine for a huge army in the field that had to win. And as we all know, the cliche, an army travels on its stomach.
Yes.
Well, if you want to patch those guys up, you got to feed them too. So Mr. Lincoln realized by creating the Bureau of Chemistry back in 1862 that he would be keeping the Union together by having a really effective army in the field, well-fed and well-treated, post-injury type of situation.
So the Department of Chemistry came about, essentially, the war that they believed and hoped perhaps under McClellan was going to take a few months and just be a couple of battles and go down on the hill and watch it happen. It ended up becoming a long drawn, and the masses of personnel involved in a battle that would encumber 100,000 or more troops at a time, that had to be thinking logistic-wise, how on earth do you get enough food?
It was a task.
You can't just snap down to the corner store.
No. You had to look at what was being produced, mass-produced in great industrial centers like New England. You just mentioned General McClellan's name. I haven't heard that name in years. It's good that he's part of the interview this morning. It really is. He was one of the interesting first leaders of the Grand Army of the Republic, of the Union Army. And we had to manufacture safe food for distribution to hundreds of thousands of troops in the field, and the same for medicines. And Lincoln was an interesting man. He knew and understood the big picture, and he knew what was needed to be done from a bureaucratic standpoint. And we're a bureaucracy now. We were a smaller bureaucracy then under the Bureau of Chemistry, but he knew the need to make this all work and bring it all together. So that's what he did in 1862. He put that together.
Okay.
And since then, Bob, we've evolved a lot. In fact, in 1906, I'm sure many of you viewers know this, Teddy Roosevelt signed the Food and Drug Act. That was the creation of the FDA as we now know it, from Bureau of Chemistry to the Food and Drug Administration. Really, that was in 1906. We celebrated 6 or 7 years ago our 100th anniversary as an active government agency. Did a lot to celebrate. A lot of media coverage, talks, speeches, presentations, and good stuff like that.
Okay.
I brought with me a list, and I can't remember these all myself, but a list of the laws and regulations that have come into effect in the agency over the past 108 or 9 years or so.
I love highlights.
Yeah,
Let's go with it.
It's a great thing. It tells a lot about how a country develops by looking at the laws that it puts into place. Now, recently, we'll go back to 20 or so years, and we look at the Nutrition Labeling Act. That was addressing the labeling problems that we had, updating the laws and so forth.
And this was 20 years ago.
That's right.
Because I know that there was just recently a number of standardization and updates that, because we now have the square box that says,
correct. Yeah, it's
very plain lowercase print nutritional information.
Yeah,
and that's what we're talking about.
That's a step up from it. Yeah, it's evolved a lot. But if you look at that, all the laws on pesticides, the Delaney Clause, which prohibited dyes and products in food that caused cancer back in the 1940s and 50s, we have evolved a lot since then. When anybody asks me what the FDA is, I have a standard answer which sort of encapsulates it. We're a scientifically based regulatory agency, basically designed to protect the consumer by having industry comply to federal regulations.
Okay.
And we handle protection for all of your drug products. all of your drugs, and their prescription medications and such. Your blood banks are what we handle as well. Most of your foods, not all of your foods, but most of your foods, even pet medications and pet devices are handled by us. By handled, I mean regulated, over watched over and protected. Cosmetics, I mean the soap and the toothpaste we use in the morning before we go to work is something that the FDA safeguards. That involves manufacture, involves labeling, it involves effective operation, safety and effectiveness of drugs and devices. It's a huge picture, Bob. It's really big. It's really big. So it's just a lot going on, a lot of moving parts when you're looking at protecting 300 million plus Americans. And one of the words that are thrown out all over the place now is globalization.
Well, okay, and then globalization, that brings up an excellent question of how on earth does the FDA then outreach to companies that aren't based in America and don't really have a legal foothold for you to go after it in America? I would think that, say, we'll call it a French import of magic markers. How do you regulate something that you neither can touch during manufacture or really see until it comes off of a cargo ship and is placed on the shelf?
Well, that well put. We're getting over. Now we're doing a lot of overseas inspections. Have been for a little while now. Yeah,
you have jurisdiction to do that through treaties?
We do through agreements. The people who manufacture foods and drugs and devices that are sold in this country understand the laws that we enforce. If you look at the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which was signed into law in the 1930s by Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the cousin of Teddy Roosevelt. That is really the gold standard as far as consumer safety goes. I'm not bragging, I'm just stating a fact. A lot of countries copy that and incorporate parts of the FDA, of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act.
It's okay to brag because we're all shareholders of the government.
We are. We're all,
go right ahead and brag.
We're all stakeholders.
America's a great country, and we're here to talk about it.
We got things going on. So a lot of them have incorporated those laws and regulations in what they do. And anybody who's going to import something to this country, Bob, understands the laws that they have to comply with. So they have to be in compliance with our laws. Does it mean they always are? No, it doesn't mean they always are. But we have setups at import areas. We send people now overseas. We have actually gone and committed to what we call Beyond Our Borders initiative. Okay. And we have FDA offices in Beijing, other places in China, in India. We have them in Europe, and we have them, I do believe, now in parts or developing in different parts of Europe and in South America. So we have FDA folks who are committed and assigned to work in these foreign countries to advise the governments and to work with the industry over there.
So let's, you bring up a great point about Beijing. So let's take as an example. I know you personally don't get on a plane and go look, but there's stories in the news the last couple of years of children's toys coming as imports from Chinese firms, having paint and toxic materials as part of things that could be placed in children's mouths or as part of the product. And clearly that's not in keeping with what we have, but how would you tackle that? And with an office in Beijing, and I was not aware of that, which I guess brings up the other question of, so, this misnomer perhaps of Chinese products being unregulated. Clearly that's not the case.
Basically not. I think that the Chinese government is.
I threw you a softball. So here we go.
Well, it's an interesting thing to think about because what the FDA does best is protect the consumer. That's what we're designed to do. Products from China, for example, have had an interesting lineage of pretty weak regulation. Mm-hmm. I mean, you mentioned the contaminated children's toys, and that was a very real issue. 6 or 7 years ago, we had the melamine, which is a chemical derivative. You remember that yes. showed up in the pet food. And I'll tell you, Americans are very close to their pets. They really are. And we had thousands of cats and dogs and other animals being killed by contaminated product that came from China. that really got people's attention, a great deal. So the Chinese government is looking and learning more about Americans' regulations, what we call GMPs, good manufacturing practices, and the FDA is full of acronyms. So GMPs are just the requirements that people manufacture overseas, products that meet American standards and don't kill people and don't kill pets and are safe and effective for people to use. So we are working with them. It's a long process, Bob. It really is. I'm glad you brought that into focus because the Chinese and other nations want to be part of the American market. We're like the major market for some 89 countries in the world. We're the big market. I mean, we're consumers.
Well, if you look at our trade imbalance, there's ample evidence of that.
Indication
absolutely.
right there.
But at the same point, it certainly would behoove them to become more accepted and not have negative publicity because as the world of communication gets smaller and smaller and smaller, an immediate negative rating or review or some bad thing happening causes an immediate downturn both in stock prices if it's traded, public confidence, and just the viability of a product at market. So, and it takes a while to recover. It's, where do I go to get my reputation back, right? It's a tough thing to get back.
Exactly, that's very true. In fact, the individual in China who was in charge of their equivalent to the Food and Drug Administration was heavily prosecuted for the melamine contamination episode and so forth. So they take a real hard stance on people that violate laws in an import environment that are shipping all over the world, especially to the United States, and they're taking it real seriously. So we're working with the Chinese government and other governments all over the world to have them understand what we require here if they're going to export product, whether it's medical devices, whether it's food. Well, we have a wide choice of food all in our markets all over the place. Has to be properly labeled, can't be contaminated, has to be produced in the appropriate facilities so that it's not going to impact negatively on the American consumer. So big job, huge job, but we've looked at it scientifically, and we've looked at it in a practical way, and we have folks now that go overseas and do those overseas inspections, and also are set up overseas to advise industries as to what we expect them to do when it comes to exporting to the United States.
So one more foreign question, and I'll bring it back home to America.
More domestic.
So there we go. So in the Beijing office, when an issue like this is identified, and I assume it was identified here in the States, something bad happened and some testing was done. Sure. Do you test everything that comes across? Is there a level of trust? Are there regulations that require independent testing be done and paperwork provided and reviewed? How does one find out aside from a child getting sick?
Sure. Well, that's evolved a lot as well. In the past,
I guess the question is more: is it reaction or is it more of a proactive approach?
It was a reaction in the past. You go 12 or so years ago, and oftentimes a violative or a bad product would come into the American market. We would try to catch anything that was contaminated, improperly labeled at an import site, on the coast, or if it was flown into an airport. We have inspectors who do import work, and we try to catch it there. That wouldn't always work sometimes.
Catch it by opening up the crate, pulling it out, looking at it, taking out a testing kit.
Sample inspections, taking samples, sending them back to one of our many labs and analyzing accordingly. That was an okay way to approach, but
it seems like a hit or miss.
It was tough. It was nicely put. It was hit or miss. Now we have, after the terrorist attacks of 2001, we put in a lot of food safety and food defense regulations, which now require that when you're exporting to the United States, you give us notice prior to. You tell us what's coming, and we have a huge computerized network, so we know who the good exporters are and the ones who have had issues and problems in the past. So using computerization, it gives us a heads up as to what's coming. The fact that by law, exporters have got to notify us, have got to tell us with a certain time frame when the item's going to arrive in a port, so that we can inspect it if we have to. We can look it over, check regulations on labeling, check device listings and so forth and so on. It gives us a heads up prior to, it's called prior notice really, prior to the arrival of most exports that we regulate coming into this country. So we've evolved. We've looked at the problem and realized there are needs to correct it, put through the proper regulations, proper laws to do that, trained our people, notified foreign governments and foreign companies that we're doing it this way, and initiated just an updated and better approach to working with imports coming in.
Okay, so with the keeping in mind the different philosophies, or that's probably the wrong word, but the different forms of government, China being a communist government with capitalist leanings.
Correct.
How does that interaction work when it comes to FDA? I won't say oversight, because you certainly don't oversee their government, but they certainly do need to partner with us to a certain degree to enhance their ability to export to America. How does that relationship work? It seems as though everything is warm and fuzzy until something bad happens. And, and I don't know a thing about the paint issue on toys, but I'll use that as a stepping stone, or as an example. So we now discover that red paint is toxic, and that may not be the case. Please don't go run to the Chinese consulate and yell to them about red paint. That's not the issue. But what if that were the case? How does the FDA then notify that government and say, look, kids, we've got a problem here?
Well, it's inspections. Oftentimes you want to work with the actual production facility. You're right. There is a different philosophy from the Chinese government as opposed to a democracy here in the United States. But capitalism seems to bridge the gap, you might say.
It's a beautiful thing.
It's a wonderful thing. So with that in mind, and realize
we can do what we want until it becomes a matter of, well, I can do what I want and be poor, or I can be successful and adhere a little bit.
And have big markets,
Yes.
Once again, if they want to be part of the American experience when it comes to export into the United States, they understand that they've got to play by the rules, and they do try very well to do that. So we have people that do inspections overseas. There's a courtesy and an etiquette for doing everything, but the real bottom line is America's need for proper regulations and enforcement, and they understand that. I mean, these nations are intelligent, and they're aware of market expansion and market need, and that's nice. It works. I mean, you respect the philosophies of the government, but you also expect the commonality of capitalism too, and the quality of the product. So we have people that do inspections overseas, FDA people that go over there, that work with the Chinese government or other governments, government of India, government of France, all over the place, and we work with them. We train them, we tell them what we need to see, and they adhere very closely. They take it seriously. They have to. You indicated right now, loss of faith, loss of market share is never a good thing. And it does take a while for a nation to get trust among the American consumer if they poison our children or poison our pets.
That's right. Well, along with capitalism is competition, and I would think that as other sectors of the global market become more in tune to how our market works, there's a huge upside to them to cooperating and being able to show we've got the good stamp of approval.
Sure.
The and then bringing it home. It actually, as another aside, you mentioned India and France, and I hope people understand the true scope of the task ahead of you. I look at the different groups that I work with in my position, and know how difficult it is to get everybody on the same page as far as language, understanding of our terminology, and understanding of our objectives that are the same as their objectives, but maybe going about it in a different way. At least what we're doing is not impacting when it comes to health, and that's your primary. So I just cannot imagine the scope of the issues.
Big mission.
And how many people did you say work for the FDA?
About 14,000, give or take. Yeah.
And now, how many of those folks are really on the ground, boots on the ground, working in these other countries?
I don't get that question very often. It's a good one. Well, it's an interesting. We are a bureaucracy, and it's about a 60.
I failed to mention this in the introduction. I'm actually speaking with Major Joe Laurinaitis, United States Army Reserve.
That's correct.
And so I was trying to use some Army terminology.
I feel comfortable with that, Bob. I really do. Well, we about a 60-40 split. About 40% of the FDAers are out in the field. I'm a field person. I'm here, in Foxborough, on the television circuit. The other 60% are the scientists who are doing research work at our established labs and down in our headquarters area in the Washington, D.C. area. So about 40% of the FDAs, 45% or so, get out and do the field work, do the inspections, do the imports that we talked about, do the overseas work, training overseas, coming out and doing the media relations. It's good to get out, and I can't thank you enough to have me on the program here today, because we need to get this message out to your viewers.
Okay.
Your viewers are our consumers. We have the same audience. so that breaks it down about 60-40. 60% are sort of behind the scenes doing lab and compliance, enforcing the laws. The other 40% go out and do the inspections and the outreach.
Well, I always like to bring history to the real world and to today and tomorrow. So where is the FDA now as far as what are the challenges? And we only have a minute left, and I can't believe how quickly this half hour flies. But where is the FDA going today and tomorrow?
Food safety, food safety, food safety.
Yeah.
It's really one of the biggest parts of what we do. Our first name is Food and Drug Administration. That's always going to be a concern, and we're the new food safety law is in effect. That's evolving. Tobacco awareness, and I think in a later show we're going to talk about obesity. So that's a major concern, keeping the items safe. I mean, we are a diverse population and a lot of food out there, so we really look forward to that. So that's where we're putting a lot of our emphasis, and rightfully so, because a sophisticated nation without a good, safe food supply just doesn't have the ability to advance. And I think we have that in this country. We're going to maintain that, really.
So there's a lot of work ahead.
There is.
And what does this come to home? Where does your mission go for the next 6 months to a year?
The more media outlets I can reach, the more I can talk on mic, on camera, with people like you that have a good concept, an excellent concept on what we do, and the need to get the mission out. That's what I'll be doing constantly. And you've got to have a voice. You've got to tell people what your government does, right or wrong, and you need to be transparent about it. You really have to do that.
Well, Joe, thank you very much. And I'm going to toss out some contact information. Tell me if I'm wrong. Folks, if you want to learn more about the Food and Drug Administration, log on to their website at www.fda.gov. Did I get that right?
Correct. Well done.
www.fda.gov. Also, they have a telephone number at their we'll call it the Worcester office. There's 351 communities in our town, in our state, but we'll go with Worcester. And their telephone number out there if you want to get a hold of Joe directly and ask questions about mission or their specific issues. Now, this isn't a complaint line. If they have
we have a complaint line which is separate.
Okay, so they should log on to www.fda.gov to get all that information. If you want to talk to Joe directly about community outreach or some other questions, his number, direct line, is 508-869-6023, and he's at the best extension 1101, top of the list. Joe, it's been great having you out here.
Robert, you've been great. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Joe Laurinaitis of the Food and Drug Administration. I'm Bob Hickey, your host. Thank you for taking a little bit of time to sit with me as we learn about the Food and Drug Administration. If you'd like to see this program again, would like a replay or to order a copy, log on to our website, www.fcatv.org. The best website should be your homepage, or you can call us here at the studio, talk to Marg at the front desk, 508-543-4757. I'm Bob Hickey, your host. Thank you on behalf of all the great volunteers at Foxborough Cable Access, including Betty Travers behind the camera, Deb Storrs behind the other camera, Gary Nash behind the glass, and Michael Weber, who puts us all together and makes us look good. Have a great day, Foxborough.